Laura had been waiting for this trip for months. It was supposed to be a chance to heal her strained marriage with Michael, and to give little Emily a memory she would cherish forever. The cruise ship was massive, a floating city with glittering chandeliers, grand dining halls, and endless decks stretching into the horizon. From the very first night, the family enjoyed every second, laughing during shows, eating endless desserts, and watching Emily run across the open deck with the ocean breeze in her hair. For once, everything seemed perfect. On the second day, Michael seemed unusually restless. He walked the decks alone at odd hours, sometimes staring out at the waves as though lost in thought. Laura noticed it but brushed it off, thinking he was just stressed from work. Still, something about his silence unsettled her. Emily, oblivious, was thrilled with the ship's arcade, the swimming pool, and the promise of seeing dolphins at sunrise. Laura tried to ignore Michael's distance, telling herself not to ruin the vacation with worries. That evening, a storm brewed over the horizon. The skies darkened, and the waves grew taller, slamming against the sides of the ship. Passengers hurried indoors, but Michael insisted on taking Emily for a walk along the deck. Laura, exhausted, decided to rest in the cabin, assuming they'd be back in a few minutes. She remembered vividly how Michael smiled faintly before leaving, holding Emily's hand tightly as if he didn't want to let go. Something in that smile would haunt her forever. Hours passed and Laura dozed off. When she woke, the cabin clock read past midnight. The bed beside her was still empty. Her heart began to race. She checked the bathroom, the balcony, even the hall outside. Nothing. Michael's shoes were still neatly placed under the bed. Emily's favorite stuffed toy sat on the pillow. But both of them were gone. Panic set in as Laura ran through the endless corridors of the ship, calling their names into the night. The cruise staff was alerted, and a full search began. The loudspeaker crackled with Michael's and Emily's names, echoing across the ship. Crew members searched every deck, every lounge, and even the closed-off staff areas. But there was no trace, no footprints on the wet deck, no sign of a struggle, no one who had seen them leave. It was as though father and daughter had stepped into the storm, and simply vanished into the endless Black Sea. The ship's security office was cramped, filled with glowing monitors, static-filled radios, and the constant hum of surveillance equipment. Laura sat rigidly in a chair, her fingers trembling as she clutched Emily's stuffed toy. Across from her, the head of security replayed the footage from Deck 7, the last place anyone had reportedly seen Michael and Emily. At first, the grainy black and white images showed nothing unusual: passengers strolling, a bartender cleaning glasses, and crew members passing through. Then, at exactly 12:03 a.m., Michael and Emily appeared on screen. He was holding her hand tightly, leading her down the corridor toward the upper deck. Laura leaned forward, searching for anything unusual. Michael looked calm, almost too calm, his posture unnaturally stiff. Emily skipped beside him, her small hand swinging in rhythm with his. But then something struck Laura cold. Michael never once looked at the camera, not even in passing. He kept his eyes straight ahead, his face set like stone. It didn't look like the casual walk of a father with his daughter. It looked deliberate. As though he already knew where he was going. The guard fast-forwarded the footage to the next camera, located near the stairwell leading up to the deck. But when the video played, Laura's breath caught in her throat. The camera captured every single passenger walking past that night, except for Michael and Emily. They never appeared again. Between one camera and the next, they had simply vanished, as if the narrow stretch of hallway had swallowed them whole. Laura demanded a rewind, then another, but the result was the same: they walked in, and never came out. More troubling still, when the technician checked the timestamp, there was a gap in the footage. The recording froze for exactly 2 minutes and 17 seconds, then resumed as if nothing had happened. Laura's pulse pounded in her ears. The staff muttered about a technical glitch, but she wasn't convinced. The timing was too perfect, the disappearance too precise. How could two people disappear in the only blind spot on the ship? It didn't feel like a malfunction. It felt like someone had erased them. Desperate, Laura asked to see the outside deck cameras, hoping to spot Michael and Emily stepping into the storm. But again, nothing. The deck was empty. Only the restless sea slamming against the hull, the wind bending the flagpoles. No figures, no shadows, no trace of father or daughter. The silence in the room grew unbearable as Laura realized the ship was floating in the middle of the ocean. And yet her family had disappeared without leaving so much as a footprint. The unanswered question hung in the air like a curse: where did they go between those two cameras? When the cruise ship finally docked back in Miami, the authorities swarmed aboard. Laura was escorted off the vessel, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights, her voice nearly gone from screaming Michael's and Emily's names across endless corridors. FBI agents, Coast Guard officials and local police converged, combing through every corner of the ship. Divers scoured the waters where the vessel had slowed its engines during the search, but the ocean floor yielded nothing. No clothing, no bodies, not even a scrap of evidence to suggest a fall. It was as if the sea itself had swallowed her family whole. Laura was questioned for hours in a sterile, windowless room. Agents grilled her about her marriage to Michael. Were they fighting? Had he ever been violent? Had she suspected him of planning something? Laura, exhausted and broken, insisted Michael adored Emily and would never hurt her. But the more she pleaded, the colder the questions became. Some investigators whispered that Laura might be hiding something, that maybe she was leaving out critical details about the last night they were together. The victim had become a suspect. Meanwhile, the media pounced on the story. Headlines screamed about the cruise ship mystery, speculating everything from a tragic accident to a calculated disappearance. Laura's face was plastered across television screens, branded as either the grieving mother or the woman who knew more than she was telling. Reporters camped outside her home, shoving microphones in her face, asking how a husband and child could simply vanish on a ship filled with thousands of people. Every time Laura tried to speak, her words were twisted into something sensational. Weeks stretched into months, and still there were no leads. The FBI released statements saying there was insufficient evidence of foul play, and eventually closed the case as unresolved. Laura's life became a blur of unanswered phone calls, dead-end tips, and sleepless nights filled with haunting dreams of Emily calling for her across endless black waves. Every official path led to nothing but locked doors and silence. Her family had vanished, and the world had moved on. Yet Laura couldn't. She refused to believe that two lives could simply disappear without a trace. She replayed the CCTV footage in her mind 1,000 times, combed through Michael's old emails and journals, and even hired private investigators. But every trail ended the same way, vanishing into the same void that had swallowed Michael and Emily. It wasn't just a mystery anymore, it was a wound that refused to heal, a riddle designed to torment her until the end of her days. 7 years had crawled by since that cursed cruise, and Laura's home had become a shrine of silence. Dust gathered on photo frames, Emily's bedroom remained untouched, and Michael's belongings were locked away in boxes she couldn't bear to open. But one rainy afternoon, while clearing the attic in an attempt to face her grief, Laura stumbled upon an old leather satchel tucked beneath a moth-eaten blanket. Inside, wrapped carefully in a plastic sleeve, was Michael's travel journal. The one he always carried but which had never been logged as evidence by the FBI. Her pulse quickened as she flipped it open. At first, the entries were ordinary. Michael had written about the ship's food, the nightly shows, and Emily's excitement over seeing the dolphins. His handwriting was steady, neat, familiar, but as Laura turned the pages, his words grew stranger, shorter sentences, scattered notes, and hurried scribbles as though written in secret. One entry read, "Something is wrong with the staff. Too many locked doors. Keep Emily close." Another page was even more chilling. "If anything happens, don't trust the official reports." Laura's hands shook as she read, her mind racing back to the gaps in the CCTV footage. Near the end of the journal, Michael's handwriting had changed completely. Slanted, frantic, almost desperate. The final page bore only a single message, scrawled so hard the pen tore the paper. "If something happens to me, look in the alley behind Pier 14. Don't trust anyone." Laura felt the air leave her lungs. Pier 14 was in Miami, not far from where the cruise had docked. Why had he written this? Why hadn't the authorities ever mentioned finding the journal? And most importantly, who was he warning her about? Laura read the message over and over again, searching for hidden meaning. Had Michael known something dangerous before he disappeared? Was this a planned escape, a warning of foul play, or the ramblings of a man under unbearable stress? The possibilities clawed at her mind. The thought that Michael had anticipated something happening to him and Emily was more terrifying than the mystery itself. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. The journal sat on her bedside table, its presence like a ticking clock in her ear. She felt pulled toward Pier 14, as though Michael's final words were a thread tying her to the truth she had been denied for 7 long years. Whatever lay in that alley, Laura realized, could finally explain what had happened aboard that ship, or drag her deeper into a darkness she was never meant to uncover. The night Laura finally gathered the courage to visit Pier 14, the city seemed unnaturally quiet. Rain slicked the streets, neon signs flickered above shuttered bars, and the air smelled faintly of salt from the harbor. She wrapped her coat tighter around her, and walked toward the narrow alley Michael had written about in his journal. The further she went, the fewer people she saw. By the time she reached the mouth of the alley, it felt as though the world had emptied, leaving her alone with nothing but shadows. The alley itself was choked with trash bins, broken bottles, and graffiti scrawled across the damp brick walls. A weak light flickered from a failing street lamp overhead, casting long, jerking shadows that seemed to move on their own. Laura hesitated, her heart hammering. For 7 years she had imagined finding answers, imagined the moment she might finally see her family again. But now that she was here, the silence of the alley pressed against her like a warning: turn back before it's too late. Just as she considered retreating, a figure stepped out of the darkness. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with his hood pulled low to conceal his face. Laura froze, every nerve in her body screaming. Then she saw it. Beside him was a girl. A girl with long, tangled hair and a pale face that caught the dim glow of the street lamp. Laura's breath caught in her throat. The girl looked just like Emily, only older. Older by 7 years. Laura's trembling lips whispered her daughter's name. For a moment, the girl stopped, her eyes locking with Laura's. The scar on her chin, the one Emily had gotten as a child after falling off her bicycle, was unmistakable. But instead of joy or recognition, the girl's face was blank, almost cold, as though she didn't remember, or didn't want to. Laura's heart shattered as the man gripped the girl's wrist firmly, pulling her closer into the shadows. He leaned down and whispered something in her ear, and the girl obediently lowered her gaze. Before Laura could move, speak, or even scream, the hooded man tugged Emily deeper into the darkness of the alley. Within seconds, they were gone. Laura lunged forward, but the silence swallowed them whole. The only sound was the rain dripping from the gutters above, and the faint echo of footsteps fading into the night. Standing alone in that alley, Laura realized she hadn't imagined it. She had truly seen Emily. But if Emily was alive, why hadn't she run into her mother's arms? And who was the man keeping her hidden? Laura stumbled back from the alley, her mind a storm of disbelief. She replayed the moment again and again. Emily's face, her eyes, the scar that only her daughter could have. There was no denying it. Emily was alive. But the blankness in her expression, the way she stood beside the hooded man, as though he controlled her every move, chilled Laura to her core. That was not the carefree little girl who once laughed on the cruise deck. That was someone else. Someone reshaped by 7 years of silence and shadows. Her chest tightened as she realized Emily hadn't run to her, hadn't spoken, hadn't even cried out. Instead, she had obeyed the stranger without hesitation. Laura's worst fear took root. Her daughter had been raised under someone else's control, molded into obedience, stripped of her memories. Or worse, her will. What kind of life had Emily lived in those missing years? What had been done to her? The questions gnawed at Laura, each one heavier than the last. And then came the darker thought, the one Laura had tried to push away, but could no longer ignore. What if Michael had been a part of it? His strange behavior before the disappearance, the cryptic journal entries, the way he had led Emily to the upper deck on that stormy night. Had he known this would happen? Had he orchestrated it? Or had he tried to warn her, only to be taken himself? The uncertainty left Laura torn between grief and fury. The man's presence haunted her most of all. His grip on Emily hadn't been protective, it had been possessive. The way he leaned down and whispered into her ear, the way Emily's expression shifted into lifeless compliance, told Laura that this was no chance encounter. Whoever he was, he had taken everything from her. Her family, her peace, her daughter's innocence. And now he was walking the streets with Emily as if she belonged to him. Laura stood frozen in that realization, the rain soaking through her coat, the city's neon lights blurring in her tear-filled eyes. Emily was alive, but she was not free. And the man who held her was not finished with whatever nightmare he had begun 7 years ago. For Laura, the horror was no longer in their disappearance. It was in the knowledge that her daughter was still trapped in a world Laura could not yet see, a world darker and more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. The following morning, Laura returned to the alley. She hadn't slept a second. Her mind replayed every detail of what she had seen, every flicker of expression on Emily's face, every step of the hooded man as he dragged her deeper into the shadows. The alley was empty now, washed clean by the rain. But Laura felt her daughter's presence, still lingering in the damp air. She combed through every inch of the cracked pavement and overflowing trash bins, desperate for even the smallest trace that last night had been real, not some fever dream conjured by grief. And then she saw it. Half buried beneath a crumpled soda can was a thin, rectangular piece of plastic. Laura bent down, her hands trembling as she picked it up. Her breath hitched when she realized what it was. Cruise ship keycard. The edges were worn, the laminate cracked, but the embossed initials were unmistakable: M.W. Michael Williams, her husband's keycard. The date printed across the bottom matched the exact night of their disappearance. Laura's knees nearly gave out beneath her. Her mind raced. Had Michael dropped it there? Had he been in this alley too, alive all this time? Or had someone placed it there deliberately, a breadcrumb meant to lure her deeper into a puzzle she wasn't meant to solve? The weight of the card in her hand was unbearable. It was both proof and a threat. Proof that Michael and Emily hadn't vanished into the sea, and a threat that someone had been watching, waiting for Laura to finally follow the trail. She pressed the keycard to her chest, her pulse pounding so hard it echoed in her ears. Questions spiraled in her mind. Was Michael still alive, hidden somewhere in the city? Was he a victim, like Emily? Or had he become something else entirely during those missing years? The thought that he might have chosen this path, that he might have been involved with whoever held Emily now, was a possibility too terrifying to dismiss. As Laura stood in that lonely alley with the keycard clutched in her hand, the city continued to move indifferently around her. Cars passed on the main road, neon signs buzzed to life, and strangers walked by without a glance. But Laura knew her world had shifted again. This was no random clue. Someone had wanted her to find it, and if she kept following the trail, she would either discover the truth about what happened on that ship, or step into the very darkness that had stolen her family 7 years ago. Laura stood frozen, clutching the keycard like it was the last piece of her broken life. For 7 years, she had been living in a nightmare of absence, no answers, no closure. Now, the truth was closer than ever, yet far more terrifying than she had imagined. Emily was alive, but not free. Michael's fate hung in the shadows of that alley, tied to secrets Laura could barely comprehend. The rain began again, dripping from the rooftops and pooling at her feet. She stared into the darkness where she had last seen her daughter vanish, her heart pounding with both hope and dread. The keycard was not an ending. It was an invitation, a warning, a test. Laura whispered Emily's name into the night, her voice cracking, but only silence answered. The city moved on uncaring, while she stood on the edge of a truth that could destroy her. And as she slipped the keycard into her pocket, one haunting realization settled deep into her bones. This wasn't the end of her search. It was only the beginning.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.